the prayers, let's take a moment to set our motivation. Make sure you're relaxed, comfortable. Okay. And then to think in this session, may I again be able to learn more about mindfulness, about alertness, and in this way about my own mind, my own emotions, and so forth. So that I'll be able to reduce my negative emotions and replace them with positive or constructive emotions. Not only to find more peace and contentment myself, but to also help others to attain these states. And may I eventually become a fully enlightened Buddha. So that I be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. And with this motivation, let's recite the prayers.
באמצעות המצבורים של הקשבה לדרמה, הוא השיג בודהיות כדי להוליל ליצורים הנודדים. לו יזכו כל בעלי התודעה לו יפרדו כל בעלי התודעה מסבל ומגורלי הסבל. לו לעולם לא יפרדו כל בעלי התודעה מאושר ופרטים. לו יפתחו כל בעלי התודעה מידת ההשתהות ללא מסוע פנים של שיר ושסיר.
All right. Well, hopefully what I discussed yesterday about these three mental factors, although you were tired yesterday, you had a long trip to get here, hopefully there was some understanding, some comprehension. And of course you have the opportunity to ask about them again. And I'll just briefly summarize those 3 types of awareness again, and then of course we go into the different types of mindfulness and so forth. So as said yesterday, basically when we talk about mindfulness, we talk about 3 types of consciousness. So please don't misunderstand when I say we may misunderstand mindfulness to only refer to one mental activity, because even in the Buddhist tradition we do talk of mindfulness in relation to all those 3. So oftentimes you'll find that terminology can be used in a way where, for instance, you apply the name of the cause to the result. Right? Actually, you're talking about the cause, but you apply that name. Or actually, you talk about the result, but you use the word, the name of the cause is used to then describe the result, like karma. It's my karma. It's actually just saying it's the result of a karmic action, of a karma in the past. So terminology can be used in a specific way, which is not exactly precise, but there's a specific purpose for it. It gets too complicated, or it becomes easier, basically, if you use words in that way. So when we say mindfulness, actually it refers to alertness, actual mindfulness, recollection, and then introspection. So all those 3. Because those 3 are at work when we engage in what's called the practice of mindfulness. So, alert, being attentive. I guess we all are aware of attentiveness. We all have times when we're very attentive. We're very interested in getting to know something. We're very interested in understanding something. And then there is alertness. Naturally, it arises out of that wish to know, etc. So we know what alertness refers to, being attentive, alert. Sometimes the word that's used is heedfulness, being careful or heedful. Careful is maybe not a good word, just using that word in itself, but it's the sense of being right there, being attentive. Heedful, if you like, in the sense of careful, just right, not being distracted. So that's alertness. That's the word, or that's the mental factor of alertness. But in order to be alert in an effective way, to be alert not just for a short period of time, but for a longer period of time, you need mindfulness. You need this mental factor, or the mental function of remembering what you're alert of, or what you're attentive to. What you're attentive to. What is it? Alert of or alert? To alert to. So what you're alert to. What?
It's okay.
Zippy. There's Zippy. Okay. All right. I didn't see Zippy there. Okay. So anyway, basically we need to be able to stay attentive on something, but for a longer period of time. So you have the faculty of remembrance that allows you to stay with the object. Okay? Of course, it's also necessary to remember the object itself, a certain object that has already happened in the past, although not long ago, just a moment ago, an emotion arose. So to be aware of that remembering faculty, that's possible because of mindfulness. But then also to keep the alertness focused on the object, to be able to observe it for longer. And since we have the tendency to be distracted and to be scattered, we also need introspection, this guarding function of the mind, to again and again check, am I being alert? Am I being attentive? What's going on? Right? Check our own attentiveness. But of course, introspection is also needed in the first place to watch our own mind, to watch our own emotions, to keep to get to the object that we're trying to be alert of. Okay. Now, like I said, we have definitely alertness and mindfulness. I had mentioned that yesterday. We have those faculties. We use them all the time. But the objects we choose are not the objects we choose here. There are different types of objects. We choose external objects. We choose, like I said, in a negative case even, when we're obsessed about what someone has said to us, someone having abused us, having insulted us, using harsh words, telling us we are stupid or whatever. In that case, we keep obsessing about those words. We're very alert, we're very attentive to what the person has said, and our mindfulness or our recollection does not allow us to let go and move on. Right? Again, we think about it. So in that case, these mental functions are at work, but they're used in a destructive way, in a way which actually harms us. Now, what we're trying to do here is we try to focus these mental factors on 4 types of phenomena, 4 categories of phenomena. One is the body, our physical body. One is feeling, then mind, and phenomena. Now, what does that? The first two are pretty clear, but what does the rest mean? So the last, the third, and the fourth, it's not that clear what that actually refers to. So first of all, the body, becoming aware of our own body. So any physical event. Then feeling. What is feeling? Well, feeling, usually we have a sense, we understand feeling. Yeah, I feel good, I don't feel good. Well, that's exactly feeling good, not feeling anything. That's the type of feeling we're looking at. So it's actually pretty simple. There are 3 types of feeling. There's a positive feeling, a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, and a feeling that is none of the two, which is described as a neutral feeling. So oftentimes we just say, I don't feel anything. I don't feel good or bad. I feel nothing. Well, we do feel something. We feel none of the two. Pleasure, pleasure or displeasure. And so therefore it's described as a neutral type of feeling. And here we're not talking about I feel angry, I feel excited. That's taking feeling to a different, that's part of the category of mind, that the third category. So basically when we observe feeling, what we do is just become aware of the different types of feeling that arise with the different types of awareness. So right now we have 6 types of consciousness. 6 types of consciousness are with us right now. I'm not saying they're simultaneously active, but I'm saying they're all there. They're all present. You have the 5 sense consciousnesses and you have the mental consciousness. So the fact you can see me, that's because of the eye consciousness. The fact you can hear me, it's the ear consciousness. You're aware of the smell, etc., tactile sensations. So 5 sense consciousnesses, which they're not active at the same time, which basically means they don't know their objects simultaneously. They're there. And it's kind of like sometimes they use the example of a monkey in a house. A monkey in a house that jumps from one window to the next. It can do so very quickly. It very quickly jumps to this window, that window, but it can never be at 2 windows at the same time. That's sometimes the analogy. It's also used in a different way. The analogy can be used in a different way, but in this context of explaining the fact that the 5 sense consciousnesses can perceive their objects only in alternation. In other words, you can see something, you can be aware of a visual object, and then a moment later you hear sound, and then a moment later you smell, etc. So you perceive sound. That's in you know the sound, you know the smell, you know the visual object. But because it's so fast, there's no problem with a break in between, like missing things. Well, you can miss if you're very attentive to a sound. You may not be able to switch to the eye consciousness quick enough to maybe see something moving past your sphere of vision. Okay? So therefore, the example I sometimes give is like, let's say you watch a movie, you listen to the dialogue of the movie, incense is burning, you're eating a sandwich, and someone is giving you a massage. Sounds comfortable, right? Okay, so at that time, potentially all your 5 sense consciousnesses are very active. Okay, But it's not simultaneous. So you see what's going on in the movie, then you hear the sound. But because whatever happens in the movie, whatever dialogue is taking place, whatever sounds there are, because they don't happen that fast, you can still follow the dialogue, follow the movement of those pictures, and still enjoy the sandwich, understand that the incense is burning, as well as, feel pleased about the massage. Okay? Because you switch back and forth so quickly. So it's like this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So that's what our mind is very good at doing, switching back and forth. Okay? Can do it very rapidly, giving us the impression of simultaneous perception, which actually doesn't take place. Okay. Now every time, with every of those sense consciousnesses, there is each of those consciousnesses perceiving a sense object. There's always a sense of pleasure, displeasure, or neutrality. I mean, it's obvious with the massage, right? Okay, so if the person knows what they're doing and they're hitting the right spots, it's definitely this tactile sensation comes along or is associated with this feeling of pleasure. If the scene in the movie is one of violence and you disapprove of violence, well then, when you see the scene of violence, there's a feeling of displeasure that goes along with this eye consciousness, with that perception. So it's nothing more than that, just sense of pleasure, sense of displeasure. Okay? Smell, likewise, you like the incense, sense of pleasure, and that is only with the senses. And of course, then there is the mental consciousness interpreting whatever you perceive, and then the story is more extensive. Oh, that's a good incense. I like that incense. So the feeling, the feeling of the nose consciousness that perceives the smell, well, that is then passed on to the mental consciousness, registered by the mental consciousness, and there's a very rapid process of, oh, that's a good incense, I like that, I need to get more of that. Oh, that's a violent scene, that's terrible. So we switch back and forth between pleasure, displeasure, or in some cases, I don't really particularly like the sandwich, but it's not like I dislike it, I just don't care about it, I'm just hungry, I'm just going to eat it. So these are the different types of feelings. Of course, most important is the feeling that comes along with the mental consciousness. The feeling of strong displeasure would be, for instance, feeling depression, feeling depressed, feeling unhappy, feeling frustrated. Strong feelings of happiness would be feeling rapture, feeling blissful, feeling kind of content. So those are different varieties of pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings that arise with the mental consciousness. Much more sophisticated, if you like, in comparison to the sense consciousness. But still, it's a matter of being aware of it. Feeling is considered very important because it gives rise to so many disruptive emotions, to so many negative or harmful emotions, afflictive emotions. Okay, so that's feeling. So with mindfulness, being aware of the body, being aware of feelings, and then the next object is being aware of the mind. Now, there are different explanations with regard to what mind refers to. Some say mind refers to any mental event other than feeling. Any mental event. So there's such a huge variety. Our mind arises in the form of thoughts, in the form of doubt, in the form of, especially the mental consciousness. Here the focus is basically on the mental consciousness, different from the sense consciousness. In the form of judgment, in the form of anger, in the form of love, in the form of compassion, in the form of categorizing phenomena, in the form of, what else? Wrong perceptions, in the form of ideas, in the form of dreams, daydreaming, etc. So many different types of consciousness that we're usually not aware of, and therefore which needs to be observed, which needs to be understood. And then the last category is that of phenomena, which is usually said to include everything that was not mentioned before. Anything that was not mentioned in the first three categories. So, Body has already been mentioned, mind has been mentioned, but here refers to my body, my mind, my feeling. Well, there's everyone else's body, mind, and feeling. Though the explanations differ here, Some would say phenomena includes all the other things that have nothing to do with me. So all the other feelings, the other awarenesses, the other bodies that belong to other living beings. But some would say no. The first category, body, includes my own body and the body of others. The category of feeling includes my own feelings and the feelings of others. The category of mind includes my own mind and the minds of others. And then phenomena are all those things that are not included in those first three. So you come across different texts, different ways of explaining, just different ways of categorizing those four. Never mind. So it's not, you don't have to choose any of them. Basically, you get a rough sense of what the object is. Body, feeling, mental events, mind, and then phenomena. Okay, so why those four? Why those four? Well, according to Lama Tsongkhapa, who's the founder of what is called the Gelugpa tradition in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, he says in the text called the Golden Rosary, a weird name, anyway, Golden Garland or Golden Rosary. So in that text he says, the reason he gives, and that's just one reason, is that we try to understand what the I is, who I am, who am I, how do I exist. That's a major concept in Buddhism, considered very important because misunderstanding it leads to all our trouble. Now, the body is basically described as the abode, for lack of a better word, as the place of the I, the thing, the locate. It's that physical basis in which the I resides, the self resides, right? I mean, if you have a sense of who am I, you're not going to point at the table in front of you. Oh, that's me, right? You're not going to point at anything around you, but rather at this body. You don't really literally mean I'm this, or I'm this, or I'm this. The Japanese would go here, right? We usually go like this, right? So whichever part you're pointing at, you don't literally mean this is me, or this is me, just this, and the rest belongs to someone else. No, but it's giving us a rough kind of sense. Okay, so this is where the I is located. So therefore the body, very important, is that it's the basis for the I, it's the vessel for the I. For the mind, of course. Mind, vessel. Okay. Then you have feeling. Why are feelings important? Feelings, he says, are that which is experienced by the self. But that's not the only reason. There are more reasons to that. Another reason is that feelings are that which drive us. Feelings are that which drive us. We feel good, we want more of something. We feel displeasure, we feel repulsion. It leads to repulsion, it leads to anger, to aversion, resentment. And then if neither pleasant or unpleasant feelings are there, it leads to a sense of indifference. Okay? So if any of the emotions, any of the destructive, the afflictive emotions become active as a result of feeling, then usually aversion is associated with an unpleasant feeling. Attachment or grasping is associated with a pleasant feeling, and then a sense of indifference. Don't care. A sense of indifference or not being interested in getting to know the object, not being interested in correctly perceiving it, in other words, ignorance or not knowing, they're associated with the feeling of neutrality. So feeling is extremely important. It's explained separately on many occasions. When you talk about what makes us a person, that's usually described as the 5 skandhas or the 5 aggregates. Feeling is also one of them. It's explained separately. Well, one other reason why, not only the fact that the different afflictive emotions arise according to the feelings that arise, so what I call the 3 poisons: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. They arise in dependence on those three. But also, we confuse the object and the happiness, the object of happiness and the feeling of happiness. So that which we associate with the cause of the feeling, we confuse that with actual happiness. So naturally we crave, I don't know, the person who makes us feel good. Because we identify them as the happiness. That's happiness. So instead of grasping at the feeling, we also grasp at the feeling to a certain degree, but we mainly grasp at the object, believing that this object in and of itself is able to provide us with that happiness, forgetting that they're different. There is the object that leads to certain mental events, a recognition of who the person is, and eventually to a feeling. And then instead of craving the feeling, we associate this person with that feeling and think they're one. I'm not saying we rationally think they're one. We think emotionally there's an instinctive sense they're not different. We never analyze these instinctive notions that we have, but which nonetheless govern our actions. So if I were to ask you, is the person who makes you feel good and the feeling, are they the same? You go, no, of course not. They're not the same. This is a guy over there or a woman over there, and this is me, my feeling over here. But it feels that way. Without analyzing it, it feels that way. There's no difference. So we basically crave certain objects because we feel they're the source of happiness. That's happiness. Okay? And so that's the case with food, the case with other people very, very strongly, but also with food, with reputation, with gain, with being praised, etc. So all these different things we basically crave. All right. So therefore, feeling is considered very important. Understanding feeling, and then mind, of course, mind, like all the stuff that's happening within our experiencing faculty of consciousness. What is happening from moment to moment? It's so complicated, it's so sophisticated, it's so fast. Like I said, we're very good at very quickly switching back and forth between different awarenesses. So that gives our mental consciousness all the time in the world to confuse us. Right? To be totally confused from morning to evening, different ideas, different thoughts. And again, what we do is we confuse the referent object, as with the feeling. The referent object is that what we have feelings for. So the person, the other person, reputation, physical objects, etc. We mix them. We mix the object and the mind. Likewise, when we throughout our days, our experiences, we are not able to differentiate between the observer and the observed. We can't really differentiate between them. We're aware of the observed and feel that's just reality. That's just reality. I'm just perceiving what's there. We're not actually aware of the perceiver. But not just that, we also feel we're just taking in what's actually there. We're not aware that our mind plays a huge part in interpreting what's going on. So we believe that referent object, the object that our mind takes on, to be reality. Although it's our mind that's basically created it, that expanded on it, that did all these things, that classified the object, judged the object, put labels on it. It's good, it's bad, etc. And then believing it's got nothing to do with me labeling it as good or bad. It is good or bad. Okay. So if that's the case, and we're usually only mindful of the objects, well, obviously we have a problem. We miss out on so much. So it's so important to watch that which creates the objects. So when we say the mind perceives objects, well, yes, it does after it creates them. Right? I mean, of course, modern physics, create is a bit of a tricky word, but if you look at modern physics, right? Of course, what we know about modern physics, that's just a rational understanding. It doesn't feel that way, right? But this is where science supports this Buddhist idea. This one very important Buddhist idea. The idea that blue is not out there. There is no blue, there's no red, there's no yellow out there. There's just photons. There are light waves of different length, and these colors are actually not out there. And it's only because of what happens on a physical level, those photons with the retina and whatever happens, electrical current, neurons firing away, all that. Again, that doesn't explain why we see blue. It doesn't. It just explains the physical process that is correlated to a perception of blue. But I've been told, according to my limited understanding, what I understand is that scientists still don't know why we see blue. They understand what happens on the physical level, but why that leads to the experience of seeing certain colors, they don't know. But the point is, blue is perceived by a consciousness. There's no blue out there. There's no blue found within the brain. Right? That color is a very unique experience we have with our eye consciousness. Okay? Whereas out there, they're just photons and light waves, etc. So really, blue is that which comes from the mind. Without mind, you couldn't have the color blue. But that's not how it feels. His shirt is blue, and I just see it. Right? It's you. Well, quite a few of you have blue shirts, the one behind you. Right. So, blue shirt. Okay, so therefore, it doesn't feel that way. It feels the opposite. The opposite of what's the case. It's actually just a subjective experience of a color. No, it seems it's over there, and it's in and of itself beautiful or not. And I'm just observing it. See, it's the opposite of what's actually the case. It's my mind that, it's because I have this mind, I have the object. So, I don't even know, to be honest, I don't even know whether there is blue. Just because Iki says there is, that doesn't mean there is. Even if we all agree there's blue. At some point everyone agreed in this world that the world was flat. Didn't make it flat. Right? We may agree on many different things, but that doesn't mean it's true. So actually we don't really know whether the objects are there. We only know we experience them. So the actual thing we can definitely be sure of is consciousness, is awareness. So it makes total sense. It makes total sense to give special attention to it. And then understand these different types of awareness, etc. It's very important. And then, of course, with that category, having gone through that category, then it makes sense to focus on everything else, of all other phenomena. Right? Things around us, the objects around us. And here again, the emphasis is more on what's going on right now. Because what we also have a tendency to do is we have a tendency to not be here right now. Of course, I already mentioned it. We're never totally in the present, but close enough. But usually we think about what am I going to happen tomorrow? What am I going to do tomorrow? Especially in the 21st century, we're obsessed about planning ahead. And planning ahead is one thing. It's not too bad. But then we get worried about what could happen. Spend so much time worrying about things that actually never take place. It's bizarre. I mean, in the Buddhist scriptures, in the Pramanavartika, in the text on logic, it says the future is doubtful. The future is uncertain, or it's doubtful. We don't know what's going to happen. So why go through all these scenarios and worry about all of them? Only one scenario can take place, but we go through all of them and are worried, tenfold or 20-fold. So we're very much preoccupied with what's going to happen in the future, although, no idea what is going to happen. Likewise with the past. Again and again, we go over things that happened in the past. Past is past. Can't change it. Why not just let it go? Learn from our mistakes. Yeah, okay, I made a mistake. All right. Next time I'll try it differently. Okay, that's as much as we... But instead of going over it and over and over and over, right? Like I said, this obsessiveness with someone insulting us. Again, And then our reality keeps changing anyway. That's why witness statements are terribly unreliable, because oftentimes we go over it, we associate certain thoughts and stuff, we associate them with the situation, and what we remember actually never took place. Okay? So in that way, that's one of our main, most basic problems, not being really in the present, but obsessing about the past, worrying about the future. And so here, initially, we are encouraged to be with what's happening right now. What is going on around me? Okay, so phenomena, the fourth category, other than the first three. So when we talk about mindfulness, in the beginning, all we're asked to do is to observe. To just observe. Now, it's very difficult to just observe. Especially, I think, again, in the 21st century, we're being successful, doing it well, doing it right. Already these obsessions, right? So we can't help it to just observe. It's easy to explain, but very hard to do. Right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it really good? Am I concentrated enough? I'm not doing it right. That's me again. There you go. Right? We have this tendency to beat ourselves up, to be very judgmental of ourselves. It's boring. Nothing is happening. Right? We get bored. I mean, we're used to, quick things, and we don't really observe properly. We just kind of take in a few things, and it's just boring, and we don't want to do it. So the problem is to be just observing, but with an open mind and with curiosity. So alertness comes with a sense of diligence, with a sense of joy, being relaxed and not judgmental. So sometimes modern interpreters of mindfulness, they describe it to a scientist. Like when you're a scientist, it's not like you're judgmental already. Oh, it's going to be like this. It's going to be. I mean, you could be, but that would definitely negatively influence your results. So therefore, it's just a curiosity. Oh, I wonder what's going to happen. So you're totally open to anything, ideally, without any expectations. Whatever's there is fine. And have that acceptance and gentleness. So that's extremely important to start off with, because we're so judgmental, because we have expectations, because we have a natural tendency to grasp at this, to crave this, to grasp at something else. So just to totally let go. It's a total letting go. Just observe. Right? And actually, once you can do it, wow, we can finally breathe. There's a sense of relief. There's a sense of freedom already, just not having to do something all the time. Just observe. Just be present. So that's how it all starts. So that's these are the practices that you find in the Theravada or the Pali tradition when the focus is on the most basic mindfulness. Just observing. Okay? All right. So, with regard to the body, how do you observe? Oh my God, especially in the 21st century, it makes so much sense to observe the body. Because we have very complicated relationships with our body. Okay? First of all, a lot of us are not fully in touch with our own body. We're too busy surfing the internet, or, working for that promotion, or with our relationships and so forth. We're not really in touch with our own body. What's really going on from head to toe? What's going on? Right? Just be aware of each part. On one hand, yes, this is where the I resides. But it's like it's almost like you live in a house and you've never been to every room. Right? You don't know how messy it is. You don't know what's going on. You're just kind of like standing outside your house in a way. But you're very, very protective of that house. That's my house. It's very precious. You're never satisfied, really, with the way it looks. One is things too big, one is too small. If it's curled, it should be straight. If it's straight, it should be curly. So anyway, we have a very complicated relationship with our own body. And on top of that, we're being told all the time. And we see pictures of models who would not survive for a few minutes if they really looked like that. Right? I mean, Barbie be dead in like no time. I mean, she'd suffocate. So the point is basically all these body images. Of course, with the 21st century body images, we are we perceive consciously and unconsciously. I mean, I love advertising. In a sense that I'm at awe. I'm totally impressed by the intelligence of advertising. So clever. So clever, these messages that not just consciously, unconsciously, the things we're being told. I mean, it's very dangerous, of course, but at the same time, those people who created those advertising, they definitely have a very good understanding of the mind, psychology. Unfortunately, they use it in a destructive way, but the first point that helps us to not be harmed by it is to become aware of it, to understand it. And so these ideas that our body should be in a certain way, we're not okay the way we are, so we end up with this terrible body image that leads us to starve ourselves or throw up the food we have and be obsessive about exercising, and just not to be happy with who we are. So basically, when we start with this mindfulness of the body, it's just an acceptance. I have this body. It allows me to walk up, to get up and walk to the bathroom. If you can no longer do that, you realize how precious that is. I got a scratch in my back. I can scratch myself. I mean, if we never really think about that, but the fact we can do certain things, we have certain freedoms. If you no longer have them, then you realize how precious this body is. So it's a very precious vessel. It enables us to go to Dharma teachings. It enables us to meditate. It helps us in so many ways. So to focus on that part, that sense of gratitude and that sense of acceptance. But then, of course, also mind and body being very related. Every time there's a thought, every time there's an emotion, it leaves something in the body, some energy is created. So there's a lot of tension in the body that we may not be aware of, which potentially can lead to disease, etc. So with mindfulness of the body, you scan through the body, you scan through it, and release these tensions, just the face, like our face, around the eyes, around the, we're like tight. We're uptight, like any kind of emotions. This is why people like Paul Ekman, you may have heard of him, is I think he's a cognitive behavioralist. Anyway, he's this hotshot kind of psychologist or scientist who works with gestures. Like he's very aware of the micro gestures in the face, for instance. And he's come together with His Holiness the Dalai Lama many times. And there's a book that was the result of such a meeting between them. He helps the FBI and the police to interpret gestures correctly, or what do you call those? Gestures? No. Facial expressions, yeah. So facial expressions. So he's understood that the mind gives rise to all these very subtle facial expressions, and so basically it helps, law enforcement and so forth to read them correctly to find out whether a person is lying or not. Okay, but the reason I'm saying this is that every thought, every emotion that arises has an impact just on our face, but also, of course, on our entire body. Okay, certain parts of the body that become uptight, there's energy that gets blocked. And so here, this understanding that mind and body are closely related, so therefore to look at the body and to release this tension. Okay, to scan through the body. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to do all this here. So I'm just explaining this so that hopefully, already last night, we started with the body. So I ask you to watch your body as part of the in-between session. And so in-between session, I'll ask you to do something. So then hopefully, if you do this, you get a first-hand experience. And also, you can do this on a daily basis. It is so simple. So a lot of us feel, meditation. We have this funny idea, I need to arrange that seat and put on the incense, and I do this and I do that. And then when we want to sit down, time is up. We're already busy, we have to catch the bus or whatever. So meditation seems to be such an effort, we don't actually do it. Of course, there are certain types of meditation. If we can make the time to arrange a certain space, to set our mind in that, that's perfect. But if we can't make the time, it's not like either that or nothing. So I think especially mindfulness is so helpful throughout the day, no matter what we do. Mindfulness of the body, what is happening? What is happening while I'm making this tea, I'm making this coffee? What is happening inside the body? Do I feel tense? Do I feel relaxed? Right? Am I in touch with all the parts, with my feet standing on the ground? Right? My knees. What is the position of my body? I mean, just in general, if I'm slouched over, eventually I'll have a back problem, etc. So just from that perspective, to just be alert, to just be attentive to the body. And yesterday I went through a whole list of benefits, in just general benefits, nothing to do with Buddhism, just these general benefits that scientists have found to be caused by mindfulness. Well, it makes perfect sense. If we don't worry about the past, we don't worry about the future all the time, we're not obsessing about, if we're just right there in the present, all this heavy baggage created by our own mind just can't be created. Doesn't take place. We're just there because there's this constant chattering, that constant obsessing. It'll fall away because we pay attention to the body. So just that very simple technique, that very simple attentiveness, lets go of all, or gets rid of a lot of tension, a lot of anxiety, a lot of problems. Okay? Just being with the body. All right, that's the first. But then also with feeling. So this will be your homework. This will be your in-between session work after the session. So we used the in-between session with the body last night. And then likewise for the in-between session, feeling. Just observe feeling. So instead of just observing the tactile sensations in your body, how does it feel? Does it feel pleasant or unpleasant or neutral? Just become aware without any judgment, pleasant or unpleasant. Or mental consciousness. Oftentimes, of course, the moment we start, how am I feeling mentally, then the feeling goes away. Of course, they can't arise at the same time. So it's like you need to have mindfulness and allow for the feeling to arise, and again mindfulness and arise. So it's this switching back and forth. In response to Bada's question last night, and it needs more than what I'm saying now. Of course, it's an ongoing answer to this question, but it's like, aren't we told to be mindful all the time? Well, if we're mindful all the time, we're attentive all the time, we just hold on to one object, we can't do anything else. So of course in the meditation there are times when that is encouraged as part of our practice. But no one is telling a bodhisattva, just be single-pointedly focused and stop thinking about things. Oh, no, not a good idea. So when we say be mindful all the time, it's almost like that mindfulness is like a spy around the corner. Alertness, mindfulness, and introspection, right? And they're always kind of ready to become active. So I'm standing there, chopping my vegetables, whatever, right? And so what kind of feeling, in this case here being mindful of feeling, what kind of feeling arises? To just check. Is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? So without being carried away, why do I not feel good? It's because he or she said, that's why, without kind of creating that whole story, you just observe. Okay? And again, just getting to know your own mind. That's the first step, just getting to know what is going on. Again, to remind you, if those objects we perceive are created by the mind, I need to understand that mind. So when we observe the body, we're actually not observing the body, we're observing the tactile consciousness, the body consciousness. We say we observe the body, but really we can't observe the body without a body consciousness, a sense consciousness that allows us to do this. And it's mainly the body consciousness, but of course we can also look at the color and the shape, the sound of the heartbeat, the smell and so forth. Well, I'm not going to really bite into your arm, but the taste maybe in your mouth, for instance. But it's mainly the body consciousness, the kind of tactile sensations. So really, when we say we observe the body, we don't literally observe the body. We give the name of the cause to the result. We observe the body consciousness. What does the body consciousness perceive? It arises as a result of the body, right? So we don't observe, the mindfulness does not observe the body per se, it observes that which the body consciousness perceives. And then with feeling, it's the same. We observe awareness. We observe different feelings, different types of feelings, and therefore different types of awareness. And then all the other mental events, so many of them, just observing, without judgment, with curiosity, with openness, with gentleness, right? Being relaxed, whatever is there. How interesting. And again, if you wonder, how could you have all these results, such as lower blood pressure, academic performance enhancement, what else did I say? Less tension, less anxiety. Yeah, because we let go of that obsessive mind that's never able to just stay in the moment of just observing the observer. So naturally. So if you understand that's the result, you also understand how this activity can actually lead to those results. Does that make sense? And then of course everything else around us, the birds, the sun, all the other objects around us. And again, we're actually just observing the mind that perceives them. We're really just aware of them. We cannot literally access. I mean, when I say we see blue, we are aware of blue, for instance. Well, there is no blue out there as such. It's just our perception of blue, and we become aware of that as it takes place right now. And just observe. So that is such an important part of getting to know reality. So most of you, I'm pretty sure, are aware, if not all of you, are aware that Buddhism is all about understanding reality. So when I said yesterday, understanding the mind, the science of the mind, is really saying, well, our reality is only found in our perception. What do we mean with reality? There's my reality and there's every one of your reality as a result of our different types of awareness. Okay? So therefore, it's really about understanding. Reality means understanding our mind, understanding consciousness. And in this way, the way I just described it, watching body, feeling, mind, and phenomena, we're really doing that. We're observing our experiencing. Okay? So, understanding reality, therefore, how do things really exist within the sphere of our perception? Objects, and that which perceive those objects, the awarenesses. Okay. Does that make sense so far? So this is how we start off. This is the basic. But from the Mahayana system's point of view, that's not enough. It is not enough only to observe. It's not enough in the sense that it's a huge part, and without it, no Buddhist practice could be effective. But also because we have these very strong misperceptions that are the opposite of actually what is there, those need to be exchanged, if you like, or they need to be recognized and then altered. So recognition, that's that part of observation, of course. But then we're also taught certain aspects about how does our body really exist, how does our mind really exist, and so forth. And so initially it seems theory. So sometimes people, they criticize study, saying in Buddhism, all this study, all this learning about things, it's just theory. No. It's not theory. It is the record of someone's first-hand experience. What we read in the scriptures is not some kind of philosopher who just thought, couldn't it be like this? Couldn't it be like that? No, these are records of people's first-hand experience. So philosophy, sometimes the word philosophy, we borrow that word from other traditions, from other disciplines, other than Buddhism. We use the word philosophy. So of course, it comes closest to what we actually mean. But let's make sure we don't misunderstand it. Often philosophy in the West is seen as just having ideas, philosophizing, like this, like just, it could be like this, it could be like that, it sounds good, let's discuss it. It's not like that in Buddhism at all. It's not about that at all. Here's not just an idea, it is a system of thought, it's a system of ideas which come from the experience, a person having come to a first-hand understanding. So it's an experience written down or recorded by way of, usually in a written way. So for us, that's theory. But for the person who presented it, this is reality. This is their first-hand experience. Okay, so I think this is really important to understand, that what we call theory is only theory in relation to us, but not in relation to the person who wrote it down. And why are we learning about it? To turn it from theory into first-hand experience ourselves. Okay? So, to give you a simple example, if we generate attachment or if we have anger, it doesn't make us feel good. But we're not usually aware of that. The fact that we don't feel good, we're not necessarily aware. We're too busy being angry. We're too busy making a plan, retaliating, or doing whatever. So we're not really aware of that. So, as a simple example, it makes us feel crappy. If we felt content and satisfied a moment earlier, the moment anger arises, that feeling is gone. So this is what you find in the scriptures. So we go, interesting. So it's a theory initially, because if we're not aware of our own dissatisfied kind of unhappiness when anger arises, well, then it's a theory. So then, next time we know what to look for. Next time anger arises, I remember, that's what, this person said, the Buddha or someone else said. Oh, okay, let me see whether that's it. Oh, yeah, there it is. So it's really the case. So it's like you take those ideas and you apply them, see whether you can find them to be true for yourself. Make them your own experience. Okay? Same about love, compassion. Do they make sense or not? Do they make me feel good? Do they actually make me feel better than having resentment? And so forth. So it's all like there's all these experiences that are being recorded, that are being put down in writings, in the form of teachings, like oral teachings and so forth. But they're all incentives for us to first observe and then check whether this becomes our own experience. So it's really not about academics and just study. It's just the first step. If we don't know what to look for, well, our confusion just goes on. Okay, so that's what's so important. And I don't think I need to really say that in Israel, because the culture is such that study is considered important. It's important to gain knowledge, and people very quickly understand that. Then we try to take that further to make it our own experience. That the theory becomes praxis. But anyway, I usually like to stress this, because there's sometimes that sense, there's so much study and so forth, so much theory. And of course there is danger that it just remains theory, that we don't take that step. We don't take it to a further level to actually gain experience. But what I'm trying to say, and I already said that earlier, it's much easier than we think it is. In our busy schedule, there's so many things we can do automatically. We don't need to pay much attention to how to drive a car or how to, so we can do so much at the same time while brushing our teeth and so forth. And so we can actually practice the Dharma right there and then. So even if you feel like you don't have time to sit on a meditation cushion, well, it'd be best, of course, if you can spend 5-10 minutes every day. But if you can't make that time, don't let go of it. Don't stop. And I've been told, for instance, this particular group, you're supposed to meditate, and people trickle out. First you're a lot of people, and then less and less and less. Because I guess with the commitment, right, you have to do, that could be one reason, I'm not sure about other reasons, but as one reason, like, I don't really have the time, I can't do that. You kidding me? Next time you have a traffic jam, great opportunity, thanks to traffic jams. How much do you have to do in a traffic? Really, like, just, few movements, and you can do those automatically. So much opportunity to practice in a traffic jam. Okay, practice of mindfulness, watching the body, watching the feeling, watching the mind. And as I said, with mindfulness, of course, being in the present is great. But you can also, and we need to be careful with that because we have a tendency to become obsessive about the past. But with some training, what we can do is, what happened this morning? I had this awful fight with my neighbor. What exactly happened? How did I get so angry? How could I say those things, etc.? So without judgment, oh, bad me, I never get better, the whole story of like judgment, etc. No, how curious to not identify with this is me. Of course it's not me, it's my anger. So very obviously there's me and then there's the anger. So to not totally identify with it, but rather go, what just happened? Okay? And go over it again. Be mindful of an event that may not be a millisecond earlier, that did not take place a millisecond earlier, but it was fresh, it's fresh enough that we remember. And to go through it, what happened? How can I make a change next time? So complicated. It's like a chain of events. And in fact, if you have some humor, it's great. It's so funny. I mean, my own mind makes me laugh. So many times there's this weird things. One gives rise to the next, one thought gives rise to the next, and I'm looking at myself, I can't help but laughing. Right? It's like watching a funny movie where a funny guy does all these silly things and kind of endearing, they're funny, and you can laugh about them. So my mind feels like that. Right? It's just like a child, like an unruly child. It's just doing its thing. So it's part of me. So there's an acceptance and there's an openness to understanding it. But just like with an unruly child, you kind of watch it, some amusement possibly, but also to step in when necessary. I think that's the kind of attitude. If you adopt that kind of attitude, then mindfulness is not a task, it's not something difficult to do. It's very helpful. But as I said, that is just about pure observation. Now there's the next step. Which is a little bit more difficult. Because as I said, it does not just refer to observation, which is helpful, which is necessary, which is there even when you're an advanced practitioner. You still observe, you still have times when you merely observe, but you also take into consideration certain concepts. Okay, so this takes me more specifically to the explanation of mindfulness according to the Mahayana. All right, let me just check with time. So I've been talking for an hour. When is the break?
You can do it now or 10:30.
No. People are still fresh. 10:30. It's not slouched over here. I'm watching all of you. Different to last night. Okay. All right. So, as you've already heard, as Lama Tsongkhapa says in his what's called the Golden Rosary, the body is the thing that is the vessel of the body, of the self. Feeling is that which the self experiences. Mind itself is the self. We have a strong sense if anything is the self, it has to be the mind. Right? If anything is. So when we identify, if I were to tell you, choose, what do you think is the self, body or mind? It's rather the mind. Okay? So, therefore, body is the vessel of the self, feelings is experienced by the self, then just mental consciousness, mental awareness, that is even philosophically perceived to be the I. So some Buddhist philosophers who are not asserted to be the highest philosophers, they would say it's mental consciousness in general, that's the I. Okay? So, and then the phenomena, other than the ones explained before, they serve also as a basis to be enjoyed, to be perceived, etc. by the I. Okay, so that's definitely how those four are very important. But to be more specific about mindfulness of those four types versus close placement of mindfulness. There's a difference. In the Mahayana tradition, in terms of the definition, it becomes pretty clear how there is a difference. Okay, Now, I want to make sure I don't confuse you, so I need to keep track. So please keep track if there's something that is not clear. Well, let me just check so far. Everything I've said so far, does that make sense? In terms of the 4 types of mindfulness? Great. Okay, very good. Phenomena, I should read. Okay, so phenomena refers to that which is none of the first 3. So, which is not a physical body, which is not feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or a neutral feeling, and which is not any kind of mental event, any kind of consciousness, any type of awareness. So, thought, there's none of those, like thought, doubt, love, compassion, and so forth. So anything other than that is part of the phenomena, the group of phenomena. An example, a table. A table, the sky, the earth. Of course, you're right, but you still don't call that the mind. It is your object, okay. But there's a difference between like I remember I said yesterday, consciousness is an agent that perceives an object. So there is no contradiction, although it's subjectively perceived, but I don't say that the agent, the perceiver, and the object are the same. It still differentiates. So it's the object, the sky you perceive. Which other sky could you think about, right? So many of you are probably aware of that. When we talk in Buddhism about the lack of inherent existence, the lack of da-da-da, it's really just saying phenomena don't exist objectively. Nothing exists objectively. What exists from me, my reality, is what my mind perceives. Okay? But it seems the object is out there, and I'm just perceiving what's out there. And that's where the problem lies. So, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean the object doesn't exist, because as part of my experience, it does exist. So it exists conventionally. Okay? So we can still differentiate. Varda? Pardon? Well, everything that exists is a phenomenon. But this is, again, where I said that terminology can be confusing, because actually everything is a phenomenon. But why do I use the word phenomenon only to refer to certain categories? Outside of, so I'm basically saying any phenomenon other than the other two. Another example where the word phenomenon is used in a way in where you go, yeah, but that's not actually correct, is when you talk about the self and phenomena. So we talk about, how does the self exist? Does the self exist objectively and independently or not? No, it lacks independent, objective existence. So we talk about the ultimate nature, the final nature of the self, and the final nature of phenomena other than the self. So again, use the word phenomena here to refer to anything but the self. Right? Only because one category, you want to separate it out. It's more important. The body is very important, feelings are important, and mental events are very important. Because that's what makes me. And then everything else is part of the category of phenomena. Okay.
Wouldn't another example for phenomena be a combination of the two? Like a person, which is both body and awareness? It's not neither?
That's true. Yours is right. Yeah, actually, if you take a person, just a person, him or herself, it's not the body, it's not the feeling, it's not any mental event. It's like part of the category, yes. So you could definitely say that that is also part of phenomena. So phenomena is the largest category. So when we talk about being aware of, being mindful of those, it can be anything but the first 3. Yeah, so Leora is right. The person is part of that. Okay, great. Now, what is the definition of close placement of mindfulness? But first of all, why do we say close placement? What is the word close placement? Okay, now, to give you one hint, or to give you one, because I'm going to ask you to see what your understanding is. Basically, the definition of a close placement of mindfulness it is said that close placement of mindfulness is either mindfulness itself or wisdom. Now that's new. Wisdom. Now, the word wisdom or sherab. Sherab actually means literally, she means to know, rab means kind of to know well or to know correctly. Rab has the meaning of like being of good quality, of being excellent. So it's like knowing excellently, if you like, or know. It's a mental faculty we all have. Now the word wisdom seems a little bit extreme. The word wisdom seems a little extreme. You probably wouldn't say of yourself, oh, I have wisdom. I'm a wise person. You may not feel that way. But actually, this is a typical way of using terminology in Buddhism. You use the strongest aspect, and the whole category is then given that name. For instance, anger. Right? We use the word anger to describe a certain mental factor. But it even includes a sense of resentment, just feeling like, right? It's sometimes people say, I never get angry, which probably either they're in denial, or they're actually saying, I don't get totally aggressive and like I want to beat up the other person, and like, like when we associate anger with this very kind of explosive emotion of wanting to beat someone up. But actually what we fail to understand is that it's just a word, it's like a blanket term that even includes subtle resentment. Wow, this person is very annoying. Being annoyed by someone, that is also part of anger. This would be, because we need to use one word. If we start using 10 words, it becomes very difficult to talk about it. So you use the strongest emotion, anger, and give the name to the whole category, call that anger. Although it includes very weak types of anger. Does that make sense? So likewise, wisdom. Wisdom is the most, like being wise. What's the Hebrew word for wisdom? Do you have like a... Chokhmah. Anyway, so having wisdom. So wisdom here, we wouldn't think that even like an ant has wisdom. That's ridiculous, right? But wisdom again has so many different parts or different functions that are part of what we call wisdom. So just that ability to know. Intelligence, if you like. Just this ability to understand something. That function of the mind, that is the function called wisdom. And it can be as simple as identifying something as strawberry ice cream. Okay? I mean, just to give you a bizarre example. So being able to discern objects and recognize this is this and this is that. So excuse me, even though there's no subjective reality, but we still differentiate between strawberry and chocolate ice cream. Right? Between hummus and trina. I mean, it's even though we have this is my own individual experience, it doesn't mean it's not there. I can still call it this versus something else. So what helps us to do so is, of course, the mental function of discernment we always have. But with the help of discernment, we can then understand this is this and not that. So an actual understanding, an actual knowledge, an actual realization, to use the strongest word, can take place. And that is because of the faculty of the mind called wisdom. Okay, so we all have that. An ant has wisdom. A bee has wisdom. The fact that the bee figures out very quickly where are the best flowers, right? After experimenting a little bit, it's because of this intelligence, that aspect of intelligence or wisdom, to use that blanket term. Okay, now mindfulness is either mindfulness itself or wisdom. Sorry, I should say close placement of mindfulness. Mindfulness itself, of course, is what I described before. This faculty of recollection that enables us to remember what I'm focused on, remember what I'm alert of. Okay, that's still mindfulness. But I said mindfulness and close placement of mindfulness are not the same. Whatever is mindfulness is not necessarily a close placement of mindfulness, and it becomes clear why not. And whatever is a close placement of mindfulness is also not necessarily mindfulness, because wisdom, as you've just heard, it's okay, or it is correct to call a certain type of wisdom a close placement of mindfulness. So, this is very confusing, I'm aware of that, but it becomes less confusing if we understand the correlation between mindfulness and wisdom. What gives rise to what? Does mindfulness give rise to wisdom, or wisdom gives rise to mindfulness? So there's definitely a correlation. Am I making sense? There's a correlation, there's a relationship between wisdom and understanding of reality and mindfulness. Mindfulness, of course, including introspection and so forth in general, like alertness, or being based on alertness and introspection, let's put it that way. But basically that mental faculty of being able to hold an object, remembering what to hold on to. Okay, so now what do you think is the relationship between wisdom and mindfulness? Which one comes first? Which one precedes? Does one precede the other? Does one give rise to the other? What do you think? Wisdom gives rise to mindfulness. Okay, someone in the back going, mindfulness gives rise to wisdom. Haha, you're both right. In the sense that there are two explanations. Vasubandhu in his Abhidharma Kosha says, mindfulness, you have mindfulness, and he doesn't say much more than, wait, let me just search the quote. He doesn't say more than this. Oh, yeah. Close placement of mindfulness, wisdom. Great. But this is interpreted to me, the commentaries on the Abhidharma Kosha say, well, by closely placing your mind, by being mindful, then that leads you to an understanding of reality. It enables you to understand reality. Okay? So that is the initial, this is how we talked about mindfulness initially as the basis. First you observe. We observe our body. We observe our feelings. We observe our mind. We observe everything else to understand it better. Okay? But that is where we need to start off. If we're not aware of something, how can we understand it? Right? First we need to become aware of it. But then, because our mind is right now limited, we need some information. We need some understanding. So there, you have another explanation, which was given by Haribhadra, which is also described here in this text, where you first generate an understanding of reality based, of course, on mindfulness. So first, mindfulness, it gives rise to, it becomes one of the causes for wisdom, but you also learn in other ways, not just observing, but receiving information, learning about things, and then you generate an understanding, and then apply mindfulness in being focused on that, focusing on that, in internalizing your understanding, putting it into practice. Am I making sense? So it goes both ways. It goes both ways. Initially, you start off. So what we need to understand, the process of gaining understanding, of practicing. This is really describing Buddhist practice. Buddhist practice. You start off with observing. Just observing what's there. Okay? Observation. So mindfulness in the sense of observing body, mind, etc. And then that is not enough. Because of our misperception of reality, we learn about the Four Noble Truths. We learn about ultimate truth, conventional truth. We learn about these different Buddhist concepts. So after we've observed, we then gain an intellectual kind of understanding. Okay, so this is that. And once we have an intellectual understanding, we take that intellectual understanding even further to a direct experience, and then we become familiar with this. We internalize it. Of course, it's not that linear. It's much more complicated than that. So we observe. Mindfulness helps us to observe. We observe what we're being taught. We observe the body, the mind, and we learn about different ideas, different concepts. And once we have that understanding, we internalize them, we learn about them, we go deeper, our understanding goes deeper. Again, mindfulness, our understanding goes deeper. So really, it's not clear cut. It's not like wisdom first, mindfulness, and then you're enlightened. It's not like that. But it's just describing this process of wisdom, mindfulness. So it's kind of saying, we gain some understanding, but we need to take it to a deeper level. We need to familiarize ourselves with it. So that's where mindfulness comes in. And again, that leads us to a deeper understanding. And again, we internalize that. So basically, when you look at Buddhist practice, when you just go through the 5 paths as they're described, and I'm not even going to go into them because they're too complicated, but the 5 paths, the 5 levels to enlightenment, it's all about that. Gaining knowledge, habituating yourself, becoming familiar with that understanding, taking it to a deeper level, then deepening your knowledge, taking it to a deeper level, and so forth. Okay, your understanding of reality. Initially, it's very coarse. Then you internalize it. Other examples. Let's take impermanence. Right? First, we observe. Maybe give an example of impermanence makes it clearer. So first, we observe mind and body. Through observing, we come to see, oh my God, our mind is changing all the time. My body is changing all the time. When I don't look closely, I feel like, oh, I have the same emotions every day. But they're never really the same. They're always slightly different. So they're similar, but not identical. So I can only see that they're not identical, that they're only similar when I look closely. Then I get to see, oh, if I look really, my mind is different on a daily basis. New objects, new ideas. Although the differences are not great, but they're still there. So different is still different, however slight the differences are. So there's definite change. So I come to understand, I get a sense of that change. And then I learn about the fact that everything's changing, that all conditioned phenomena are constantly changing. That I bring in to my observation, and I understand that intellectually. And now again, I go back to observing, and I say, oh, it's true. And my initial understanding becomes deeper. Okay? And then again, I add again intellectual understanding, I receive teachings and so forth. So you continue receiving outside information. And again, you apply mindfulness, and it becomes deeper, and until it becomes part of you. You become. So for me, an enlightened being is someone who lives the Dharma. An enlightened being is someone who doesn't just talk about things like I do, but someone who actually lives those things. I remember after I completed my studies, which was so much intellectual, kind of so much, really a lot of theory. And then I remember meeting Lama Zopa Rinpoche after so many years again. And I was like, my first thought was, there is someone who lives it. Everything I learned is there within this person. Just for a few days, Rinpoche was around in Dharamsala at Tushita, and I received some teachings, like with everyone else, just part of the crowd, and I was like, wow, everything I learned, there's him. I remember that thought was so profound that I thought, great, I can do this. Right? I can do it. I mean, it will take a lot of time, maybe a few countless eons, but, still I can do it. Right? So that was really like from theory to actually seeing the praxis. Okay? Pardon? Yeah?
Can I ask a question?
Of course, yeah. Yes. Go ahead, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is discerning comes before mindfulness, and if so, can it be part of the definition of the wisdom?
Okay, discernment. Leora is asking about a mental function that is described as discernment. בעברית? הבחנה. Yeah, I think the omniscient mental factor, the omnipresent mental factor, which is also happens to be one of the 5 skandhas, discernment. So her question is discernment Does it come before mindfulness? And then you said about wisdom?
If so, then
If so?
it always come before, if it's part of wisdom.
Yes, yes.
Because,
Okay. Well, actually we talk about certain mental functions that are always there. That are always there. So omnipresent, they're described as omnipresent. So any awareness you have at least 5. Feeling is one of them. There's always a type of feeling. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. With an eye consciousness, an ear consciousness, and so forth, as well as with mental consciousness. But you also always have the mental factor, the mental function of discernment. Just that you're able to look at a picture and you can recognize, you look at a colorful picture, different colors, a mottled or like with various colors, like an object with various colors, and your mind is able to distinguish between the red, the blue, the yellow, etc. Okay? Subjectively red and blue, so what? But, nonetheless, blue, red, and so forth. So, therefore, your mind is able to distinguish between these objects that appear. That is because you have discernment. The mind has the ability that any object, there's always a variety of things. There's nothing singular. Because any object is made of parts other than itself. Anything that exists of parts other than itself. So if you have a cup, you have parts of that cup that are not the cup. So our mind is able to discern between the two of them if we pay attention to them. Any mind can do that. If it's too preoccupied, okay, this function may not come to full, what's the word? It would not be able to fully become active, but the ability is always there. That's discernment. Now with mindfulness is not always there. That recollection, I want to stay with the object, be focused, stay with the objects. That's not always there. Otherwise we wouldn't be as scattered as we are. But with discernment, because discernment is always there, it assists mindfulness. Right? What do I want to be mindful of? I need to be able to discern first, what do I want to focus on, for me to be able to be mindful of it. So discernment is active and important for everything. In particular with wisdom, right? Discernment is just the ability to distinguish between certain facets. Yeah? And then that gives rise to an understanding of those facets. So discernment just discerns that mental activity, but it gives rise to an understanding. Am I answering your question?
My aim in the question was, because it's obvious to me that it comes before the mindfulness, which is there, according to the wide definition of wisdom, it always includes the discernment between things, knowing which is what.
Right.
So it always precedes mindfulness.
Yes. Well, it always precedes mindfulness because mindfulness is always preceded by consciousness. And consciousness always comes along with discernment. So it's not surprising. It's not like that. Mindfulness is not always there. But consciousness is always there. So consciousness always comes along with the function of discernment. So you can basically say, if let's say you're mindful in this lifetime, of course we've been mindful since beginningless time. So it's not really, we can't really say the first moment of mindfulness. But let's say within this lifetime, you're newly born and for the first time as a baby, whatever, there's mindfulness. Okay? We can be mindful even as a baby. So there's mindfulness. Was that preceded by discernment? Yes, because a moment earlier you had consciousness. And also mindfulness is like keeping on an object, right? It's that mental faculty that enables us to keep on a particular object for some time, to recollect, to remember the object. And so without discernment, we wouldn't be able to choose to be aware of this and not aware of something else. So yes, in answer to your question, it's always preceded by discernment.
Would it be fair to say that in these examples, both Pasubando and Oribhava, they say that mindfulness comes first is because their definition, they refer to wisdom not in the broadest way.
No.
Certain.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good. Okay, very good. I'm breaking my own rules having questions now, but it's actually an important question. It's an important question. So what Leora is asking about, this discussion of what comes first, wisdom versus mindfulness, or mindfulness versus wisdom. Well, you see, I mean, it's a bit like saying what comes first, the egg or the chicken. Okay. But we can still emphasize one over the other. In particular, a type of wisdom that we need in order to break through our habitual misperception of reality, which leads to our suffering. So it's not just any odd wisdom, but it's rather talking about wisdom, an understanding of reality, which is newly generated, a new understanding of who I am and of how phenomena really exist. Does that help? So in that sense, but like I said, I don't even, actually, Lama Tsongkhapa says, Vasubandhu is wrong, Hayabhadra is right. But that, if you studied the scriptures for long enough, you know it just means something specific in a particular context. It's not so much about, chuck that one out. It's not like this objective right and wrong. It's just a matter of perspective here. So the emphasis is here more on, first we need to get an understanding of reality, and then we need to live it. We need to put it into practice. So to me, this is why here Lama Tsongkhapa says, close placement of mindfulness. What does that mean? Why do we call this particular type of mindfulness close placement of mindfulness? With the word clear, meaning, with the word close, meaning clear. It has the connotation of clearly. The closer you get, the clearer you understand, right? So close application of mindfulness here refers to gaining a certain perception of reality. Clear perception of reality. And it is through those two factors, wisdom and mindfulness, that you make that understanding effective. Now, the question is what comes first. It's basically a chicken and egg question in the long term, in the overall sense. But to emphasize practice, how do we practice? First, we gain an understanding. We understand, what are we looking for? What is it we're wrong about? What is our misperception? And once we understand that, once we generate that wisdom, then we internalize it, we practice it, we put it into practice. I think this is why Lama Tsongkhapa says it's not that mindfulness first gives rise to wisdom, but wisdom gives rise to mindfulness. This is what I think he means. Okay, Varda, last, what is it?
I find that we are mindful all the time in different levels.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I feel.
Okay.
Now, I would like a sort of...
Yeah, we come to the end of that. This is a question I'd like to answer at the end of this section. Right. Yes. We'll talk about this. But Varda, this goes a little bit more in a different direction, which is fine. But please remind me at the end of the session before lunch, when we have question and answer, I'll address it. Okay, let's take a break.